Tony Ruda, and I want to welcome you to the second episode in our new ProMusica Live series. We hope that these conversations and performances provide ProMusica Detroit members and the larger community with a meaningful connection to the arts in Detroit. This online series would not be possible without the generous support of the following individuals and companies: Dr. Hershel and Mrs. Dorothy Sandberg, Nancy Salden, Stan Beattie, James T. Napolitan and Sandra Napolitan, Gordon W. Rose, Hank Murawski and Judy Milosic, Tableau Software, and our friends at the Steinway Piano Gallery. I'm also very happy to welcome our host, Cecelia Sharpe. C. Sharpe is a graduate of Wayne State University and has been teaching and advocating for youth in the arts for over 10 years. In addition to her role as educator and advocate for youth in the arts, Ms. Sharpe serves as a guest host at WRCJ 90.9 FM, produces the In Concert with the Wu Family Academy Showcase program, as well as the Live with C. Sharpe program. We are very fortunate to have Cecelia as our host. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Cecelia Sharpe. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you, Tony, so much for that introduction, and I'm excited to be back again for this ProMusica Live concert. We're celebrating 250 years of Beethoven, who was baptized on December 17th, 1770, and the featured guest, our artist for today, is cellist Amit Peled, phenomenal cellist whose highlight for just the 2019-2020 season included over 20 performances of concertos around the world. That doesn't even include performances with his student ensemble, the Amit Peled Cello Gang. He has published a children's book, and he was also the youngest professor hired at the Peabody Institute in 2003. I have the treat of introducing to you Mr. Amit Peled. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here with you, Cecelia.
Thank you for coming back, because you're actually not new to Detroit or ProMusica, and we'll talk about that a little later. But thank you so much for coming back and sharing this music of Beethoven as we celebrate 250 years of Beethoven on ProMusica Live.
My pleasure. I mean, Beethoven is one of my dear composers. It was the best composer for my grandfather, so I grew up listening to his music all my childhood. And I'm really happy to share with you two of his major sonatas for cello and piano.
We're excited to listen to it, and we're looking forward to it. But before we get into the music, you said you grew up listening to Beethoven. You didn't start necessarily on the cello. You were headed for basketball. Can you talk a little bit about your journey and how you came into the cello?
Yes, so I started to play actually quite late. I was 10 years old, which is pretty late in our profession. Even when I started playing cello, I was much more into basketball, maybe even today, but today is too late.
Oh.
But I was really into it until high school, including playing in high school, and I was actually quite good, and now I'm 6'5", but I wasn't 6'5" back then, and that was one of the reasons why when I had to choose, I chose music and not basketball, but I still love it dearly, and there was about a lapse of 6 years when I did both cello and basketball, and until it became too hard to just every day do the practice, and then the cello, and the games, and the concerts, and my coach and my cello teacher had to meet and fight.
It wasn't a pleasant meeting, you mean?
No, well, actually it was my decision, but a lot of it was because of my height back then. If I were to know that I will be 6'5", who knows? Well, maybe I will be in the Pistons today, you know? Who knows?
Oh,
yeah.
maybe.
But the reason why I started the cello while I was playing basketball and quite good at it, I had to start a musical instrument. I grew up in a kibbutz in the north parts of Israel, very tiny place next to Afula, which is a tiny city. And in the kibbutz, we had to pick an instrument in 4th grade. So I had to pick a musical instrument, thankfully. And I picked the cello because of a girl who played cello, not because of love to cello or love to Beethoven. It was actually a love to a girl who was older than me. She was 14. So I didn't dare talking to her. And I thought to myself, I can't talk to her, she's older than me, but if I play whatever she plays, she'll marry me. So I told the music teacher, hey, I want to play what she plays. And he was shocked, my parents were shocked, and I found myself playing the cello and never talking to her.
You didn't talk to her?
No, because we went on different times to the lessons. She was older, she was in a different orchestra. And by the time I dared to talk to her, she already quit the cello and I became a real cellist. So these days we're good friends, we're not together, but we make fun of it. She says, I wasn't a good cellist, but at least I caused the cello world to find a good cellist by playing the cello.
It's not necessarily because you were so in love with the cello, but because of the girl you picked up the cello. So thank you to her for
but I have to say that right away, after a few months, I was really in love with the cello. It was never, actually thinking back now, it was never a question when I had to make this decision between basketball and cello. It was just a question of, can I still do basketball while I'm playing the cello? But cello was really love from first sight after I started, and it was clear to me that that is my path. I was very passionate about practicing. My parents never had to tell me to practice. And now, having kids, I see that if you're not passionate about it, it's a waste of time.
It's a little bit different if you're not passionate about it, and the parents, as parents, you have to provide that discipline and encourage the students to practice, your children to practice. But sometimes it's like a fighting against it when they're really not into it. We want them to have that exposure, but you can't make them have that passion.
Absolutely. I think, well, that's another subject which I think it's a lot to do with teaching. It's how you approach the kids and how you make them excited about the cello or about classical music. And once they're excited, once they think it's cool, simply cool, they might do it in a better way than just, okay, this is like math or science and we just have to do it every day.
Let's talk about Beethoven and why you chose these two sonatas that we're going to listen to.
Well, as I said, Beethoven was with me from early, since I started to play. My grandfather used to listen to it, so when I became serious about it, of course, he would tell me about Beethoven, about his life, and I would listen to music with him. The piece he loved the most, my grandfather, who by the way was a farmer, but the piece he loved the most was the Beethoven Triple Concerto for violin, cello, piano, and orchestra. And I feel privileged that I got to play it once in Israel before he passed away for him with an orchestra, and that I'll never forget that feeling. Even now my hair is like this. So that was an amazing connection through him to Beethoven. And I think for me, Beethoven is the most human composer. And I'm saying it because Beethoven is not a composer that you just can sing his melodies and have it as background music. It's very dramatic and it has a lot of abrupt changes of mood and dynamics, which is how we are. When you think about it, people say, oh, classical music is this calm thing that relaxes you. Beethoven is not calm at all. Beethoven is up and down and sides, and that's his music. Sforzandos, fortissimos, pianissimos, crescendos, all the time. And when you think about it, a day in our life as humans is like this, especially in 2020. But, you wake up in the morning, you're happy, and then you're sad, and then you don't know, and then you can go out, and then you can go out. So Beethoven's music relates, I think, to humanity in the strongest way of all composers. So to celebrate it is easy because you celebrate life, basically. And from the 5 sonatas that he wrote for cello and piano, I chose the 3rd and the 4th because the 3rd sonata is his middle heroic period, what we call like the 5th symphony, this heroic period, symphonic period. By the 3rd sonata, he mastered the form for cello and piano, and he was actually the first one to dare to write a soloistic line for the cello. So the sonatas, the form of it, the melodies, the length of the piece, the structure of it is really nothing short of perfection. And it became probably the most famous sonata for cello and piano in the entire music history. So I thought having this as a centerpiece of the program is sort of required when we celebrate Beethoven.
Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Amit Peled performing Cello Sonata number 3 in A major, composed by Beethoven.
Hello everybody,
It's Amit Peled here and Noreen Polera, and we're delighted to share with you today two of Beethoven's 5 sonatas for piano and cello as part of the 250th anniversary of Beethoven, which is this year. We're so excited to play the 3rd and the 4th sonatas for you. The 3rd sonata being probably the most famous sonata for cello and piano and the most equal sonata. Beethoven took him about 2 sonatas to master the form of piano and cello, and he came up with the 3rd sonata and had the chutzpah to start it with a cello, not even with the piano. So you will hear that, and from then on, the sonata is extremely equal. That has been a turning point in music history for the literature for cello and piano. The 4th sonata is what we call late Beethoven. And late Beethoven, one can feel that it's not even written for a specific instrument anymore. Beethoven is older, can't hear anymore, he's in his own world, and the two of us always feel when we play that we are somewhere in heaven conversing with Beethoven himself. I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, cellist Amit Peled and pianist Noreen Polera performing Cello Sonata Number 3, composed by Beethoven in 1808. A fantastic performance. Amit, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
You're not new to ProMusica and you're not new to Detroit. Tell us about your first experience with ProMusica and coming to Detroit.
Well, living in Baltimore, I always felt that we have something in common, just the the city's composed and the life and the weather. And when I arrived in Detroit the first time, I felt home, really. It feels like I'm here in Baltimore. And I met amazing people, nice, nurturing environment, which is really what Baltimore is for me. It's like, it's not New York City, it's not San Francisco, it's homey. And that's how I felt in Detroit. And also ProMusica made me feel at home. Even though it was my debut in Detroit, I felt comfortable and really special sharing the music. I remember after the first recital I gave, there were a bunch of kids, cellists, came from all over the Metropolitan of Detroit. Some of them drove for more than an hour, or from small towns around the Metropolitan of Detroit. And they just loved the concert and told me about the pieces and took photos with me, and I felt for a second that I'm like the president of the United States or something, I don't know. And it felt really welcoming and just wonderful. Even the place I stayed, the bed and breakfast, was an old building next to the museum that I could walk downtown, and the feeling was really welcoming. And sitting on stage in that small hall, I remember next to the big orchestra hall, there's a recital hall, and that's where we did the concert. And people sat around tables, and I, as you can see now, I'm not ashamed to talk, and I like to talk actually in concerts between the pieces, and it was just a nice dialogue. It felt very comfortable, and there was a nice reception afterwards. I really enjoyed it a lot, including my pianist too. We loved sharing music, and I think the highlight for me actually was not in the concert, was the morning of the concert, where some of the board members took me to one of the schools, one of the public schools in Detroit area, and I had to play and introduce the cello and music and myself, coming from Israel originally, to the kids. And I'll never forget that experience for many reasons. One of them was the enthusiasm of the kids. And that's not just Baltimore and Detroit, that's just global. Kids love excitement, and if you can excite them through music, they love music. I always like to say that when I play for kids, I always ask the same question at the end. And the question is, who would like to play the cello now? And all the kids raise their hand, 100%, every time. And what makes me sad usually is what happened afterwards, because I leave, and the person who took me to that place leaves, and then the school stays there. And I'll never forget that school where there was a violin with one string, there was a broken double bass, and there was not even a cello. And the teacher was pleading and said, that look how excited they are. And, we took photos, and there was all the kids were on me like this, pre-corona days. And then the teacher said, we don't even have instruments to teach them. And then the biggest impact was when we left the music building. We went outside, there was this amazing football field. And the principal told me this was donated to us by one of the Detroit football, players, and which is great, it's wonderful. And then I just thought to myself, why can't they donate to music and buy, instead of a football field, you can buy 2,000 instruments for the whole city. Or anyway, so we had a conversation afterward. I'll never forget it, at the restaurant with the entire board. And we talked about not just, wow, this was wonderful to come and, you tell yourself, wow, we did well for the community. No. How can we do it regularly? How can we be there? How can we bring instruments to those places? And that really, when I think back now, because of your question, that really has changed my voice as a musician, because ever since I've started, an organization here in Baltimore, and we do a lot of that stuff here, that morning in Detroit made a big impact on me. And it was not just playing for kids, I do that all the time. It was the feeling afterwards that you do it, you step in, you see the possibility, but then you step out. And that was very impactful on me.
I think having this conversation is important for the listeners, because maybe listeners don't realize that students don't have access to instruments. They don't have access maybe to teachers. Sometimes the funding in the schools is not available for teachers. There are teachers, but the funding isn't there to support them being in the school. If there is a teacher, teachers have to do so much fundraising to support the program just to have instruments repaired or have strings for instruments just to get cakes of rosin and rock stops or bows rehaired.
You know, I think that's where, as with football, you know, or basketball, the famous players, they're really famous. We are not famous, but we can, what you mentioned about rock stop, rosin, strings, I mean, we, the professional players that are actually in communication with those companies because they sponsor us. You know, I, for a long time, have been sponsored by Perpetual, which is really the best string for cello. There are many possibilities for us to maybe explore, and that's what I do here, explore with the companies that we work with, how can we get old strings? That will be good enough for the kids. Or how can we get instruments maybe from China for a much cheaper price and have the kids taking that violin home? So here in Baltimore, I established the organization called Every Child Has a Voice, and which means, you know, every child deserves a voice, like every child study math and English and goes to school, or deserves the opportunity at least. Yeah. I think math, language, science and music are equally important. So what we do here, I hope will expand to the entire country, but basically is to get instruments and teachers that are connected. So if I give a school 20 violins, I also give the school 2 violin teachers that I pay. And the command is that every single day in that school, the last half hour, they do music. Every day.
And that's fantastic that you've created that program and that you saw the need here when you came to visit us in Detroit and took that back home. I have a question for you. How do you think the everyday patron of music, those that love to go to concerts, to listen to the music, that are listening to this concert, this virtual concert right now, what way can they support and contribute to the advancement of students in music education, just creating that access and those opportunities that all students should have access to?
Well, they should know about it. That's, you know, I always, when there's less audience or less younger people in classical music concerts, I always blame first us, the performers, because I think that the way we present it is wrong. The way where you dress up with a tail and frock and you walk on stage quietly, you bow, you play and you go back and you never communicate with the audience. That's where the problem is. I'm sure that if I would come now to Detroit and play the Beethoven, I would probably at one point of the recital tell the audience about my experience in Detroit last time. I mean, that's just nature for me to do that. However, most musicians will not dare even talking to the audience. So I think once the donors know about it, they will commit to support it. Why? Because everybody knows that art, the business model of art is not to make money, is to make people who make money feel better. And feel better, I mean spiritually, not just, yeah, great, I gave money. No, it's if you're a dentist, if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, if you're whatever you are, I think as a parent, as somebody who lives in a community, it's good for you to know that the kids in the school next door gets music every day as well as they get math and science and all of that stuff. So if I would be that doctor, I'm not, I'm a musician, but I would definitely give, even if I can't hear a concert, I would give to art because art is what makes quality of life. Yeah. I remember one of the conversations I had with a doctor that was not in Detroit, but it again impacted me a lot, was somebody who was in oncology, and he said, you know, Amit, I can prolong life, but you make quality of life better. And that was really meaningful because that's all we can do. We can make quality of life better. I cannot prolong it with any medication. But what we have here, we can, with art, make better. So I think people need to know, they need to hear it with passion from artists, and they also need to see results. Mm-hmm. So they need to see that they gave money for, let's say, 200 violins to be distributed to the public school system in Detroit, that they actually distribute them and the kids actually get lessons. Now it's very easy with videos and social media. Not only get the money and buy the instrument, make sure that you make videos of it and you make those people who gave the money know what they're doing to their city, because I think the impact will be huge. You know, the first and foremost, it will teach kids to listen to each other. And that's all what we want. You know, music is about listening.
So, Amit, you have had the privilege, the honor, I'm not sure which word that you would use, of performing on some incredible instruments, the instrument of Pablo Casals, and now the current cello that you're performing today's concert on. Can you talk about that cello and what it means to you to be able to perform on that instrument?
Well, first, the Casals cello, I think one word you forgot, and it's responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's definitely, you know, when you carry that legacy of maybe the greatest cellist ever, as a humanitarian also, it's well, maybe in the beginning it felt like a burden, but it immediately changed path into responsibility, and how can I channel it to what I can do with community, what we talked about, and with playing myself, finding my own voice on the cello. With the Casals cello, I played for 6 years, and I think last time I was in Detroit, I played on that cello.
One thing we haven't talked about, and people may be wondering, how have things been going for you during this pandemic? What have you been doing? What has the pandemic allowed you to do that you may not otherwise had the opportunity to do?
Well, that's a good question. I think I always like to say that musicians, we're survivors. We always find ways to present our art. And what happened with me was that last March, when it all started, I was in the midst of a tour, just about to go to Mexico, actually. And of course, everything got canceled. But I used to be on stage about 80 to 90 times in a season. And,
Wow.
you know, to spend 4 days at home, 4 days away, 1 day at home, a week away, and so on. Just crazy, crazy lifestyle. So all of a sudden, it stopped and everything got canceled. However, I do have a full class of 15 students here at Peabody in Johns Hopkins. So I could, of course, teach them, but only via Zoom. And Zoom was totally new thing for me as well, for I think the rest of the world. But what I realized after a few weeks, that not only I can teach my students, but I can open up my studio, which is what you see now. I can open it up to the world. And there's so many cellists that started contacting me, wanting to have just a lesson on Zoom. I was very suspicious about this, but of course, having the time, I started to give it a chance and came up with the idea to create an online cello academy where people can sign up and be active. So we have one-on-one lesson, but also be inactive where you can just observe the lesson. So I would find myself having a student from Saudi Arabia, actually, or Hawaii, or Korea, or Australia, right in front of me, like we're now, and having about 50 cellists around us on the screen, just watching and writing notes. And then every lesson I end with 5-minute Q&A. So people from all ages, amateur, young, are all of a sudden involved in this system. So it has opened up so many doors. And then also these kind of events. There were many organizations that contacted me and said, you know, we can't do the concert, but could you play for our donors? Could you do now for the holiday, I do something I call a meet and greet. And it's just it's just a wine toast, basically. It's just half an hour. But what I do, I take the listener on an imaginary journey. I always start saying, you know, guys, the pandemic keeps us in our houses, but it cannot keep our imagination in the house. So I take everybody with me to Russia and to France and to Germany, and I play pieces from these areas. And it's just half an hour, and then we have a toast. And it's just nice to see on the screen these big smiling faces of people that are just stuck in their basement, basically. Yeah. So I think embracing the situation has allowed me to open up completely to a world that I knew that exists, but I was not really in touch with, because I was in this crazy pace of being a pre-corona musician, let's call it. But I think that post-corona musician will have to combine the two, and I'm excited about it because I can really have the opportunity to engage with so many more people than before.
But what do you think the new tomorrow will look like for you as a cellist, as an educator, as a music director, incorporating what you've been able to do during this corona time and maybe merging it with what you were able to do in the past? Do you see yourself being at home more so that you can maybe spend more time with your family and not have the rigors of being on the road? Or how does that look for you?
Well, I think it's all of the above. It's a combination of everything. I think what the pandemic has made me realize is that, at least I can talk about myself, but my life was what I like to call on a survival mode, which means I really didn't have time to enjoy the journey, so to say, because I was just in airports all the time. And also it made me realize now, being for the first time in my hometown with my family, with my neighbors, I started playing in the garage in the summer. It made me realize that everything that I've been doing outside in the world, like in Detroit, nothing against it, but maybe it's time for me, with all that experience of 25 years of doing it outside, maybe it's time for me to do it inside, to do it in my community more. Because God knows how much we need it here in Baltimore, but I think every community needs it. So maybe the realization for artists will be that we don't need to be everywhere in order to create art. We can also be right here in our surroundings and do it. And that doesn't mean that we're not approachable to the world, because there's technology.
Right.
So everything I do here can be live streamed. And traveling can be one component of what I do, but not maybe the only. I think a lot of the education part of what I've been doing in the last 25 years, I would like to see in my city. I mean, just to give you an example, I would go literally every week to the airport, going through, to make a shortcut through traffic. I would go through a bad area in Baltimore where people usually say, you lock your doors, and even in red light you don't stop. And I told my wife, not only that I want to stop in this area, I would like my organization that brings the instrument, I would like to do the pilot right there.
Yeah.
And why not there? Why traveling to X and Y and Z and doing it, and not right here where I'm afraid to open my car? So that's where I want to do it. Maybe that's the biggest realization for me through the pandemic, that look around in your small circle and try to make an impact.
I think that's a fantastic idea, because it goes back to creating that access that we talked about, and generating exposure, creating exposure, because perhaps in an area where you're afraid to stop, or feel like you need to lock the door, run the red light, run the stop sign, make sure you have gas, don't stop at the gas station. Perhaps that's where they need the arts the most. I'm Cecelia Sharpe here with ProMusica Live, and our guest, our featured performer, is cellist Amit Peled. We're celebrating 250 years of Beethoven, and we heard the sonata, the cello sonata number 3. And next up is his sonata for cello and piano number 4. If you could just tell a little bit about this piece, Amit, before we listen to it.
Yeah, the sonata number 4 is very different than sonata number 3. Number 4 is late period. He was already dead. He was older. I like to relate late period of a composer to a period where they don't have to prove anymore anything to anybody. It's like being an old person. You don't do things in life anymore because you have to impress. You do things because you really want to. You do it for grandchildren, you do it for your wife, you do it for your friends, you do it for yourself. Same in music. When a composer reaches the late period, Beethoven was very famous, very successful. In his late period, he really wrote music that was inside him and needed to get out. It was not a commission by somebody. It was not to try to prove that the form can work. It was not to get money so he can buy food. It was because it was there and it needed to get out to us human. And it's not anymore about cello and piano. This is spiritual. and you will see how one sonata, the third one, starts with cello alone, and it's like, here I am, life is great, look at perfection. And then the fourth sonata also starts with cello alone, but it's much more sneaking in. It's much more...
Yeah, it's a lot different. It's a lot different than the third. You can definitely hear the distinction between the third sonata and the fourth sonata, and the different periods of Beethoven's life and what he was articulating and communicating at those two different times.
Yeah, it's when you hear it, you realize, I mean, I'm now in my 40s and I feel much more like the third sonata. It's like a wild horse that is ready to conquer the world. However, when I play the fourth, I'm imagining I'm 85 and I'm telling my grandkids how once upon a time I was 40 and I wanted to conquer the world.
That was Beethoven's Sonata for Cello and Piano, number 4 in C major, with cellist Amit Peled and pianist Noreen Polera. Amit, thank you so much for coming back and sharing with us here in Detroit at ProMusica Live, our virtual concert. It's been a pleasure having you perform today and talking with you and just sharing all this, your gifts with us. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And of course, as always, you're welcome to Detroit anytime. We love to have you back when it's safe to come back.
I'll be there.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to ProMusica Live with me, your host, Cecelia Sharpe, and Amit Peled. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all the sponsors, and we look forward to seeing you at our next concert in January. Stay tuned.